Well, first off, once again, thank you for attending so that, this room is not empty and I'm not just talking to myself. That's nice. But I don't have more to talk about or another presentation or anything like that, so we can just go ahead and jump into questions. I do have the presentation here if you want to move to a particular slide. We were pretty rushed for time, so I didn't get to go into much detail on anything. But I'm just opening it up completely. Anything you want to ask about, technical, non-technical, just anything. Yes?
If you're a maintainer of open source projects, what would be a good way to build that team, and especially to bring more diversity into the team?
So I'm going to repeat the question just so everyone can hear it, but he was saying, as a maintainer of an open source project, what are things that maintainers can do in order to create more diversity on their projects? Well, I'm obviously going to first off talk about in NumFOCUS, in order to be an affiliated project or a sponsored project as a part of NumFOCUS, you do have to have a code of conduct that is in line with the NumFOCUS code of conduct. That's one particular thing, so that people know that there is governance around problems that may pop up, right? And believe me, they actually do pop up, okay? So, and then also being a part of another organization that has had some experience dealing with issues that have popped up on projects gives people more confidence, right? But one thing that I think that a lot of people overlook is that in open source projects, that having some sort of guide to your first contribution to a project is, I feel like, the most important thing that you can possibly do, right? So creating that welcome space for people to be able to contribute and know that their contributions are that they're doing the right thing in order to contribute to the project, right? What does it look like to create your first, pull request? What does it look like? What is the procedure, right? How do people, what is the culture of the project, right? So that they can feel more confident in making that first leap, right? Because like I said, I don't really contribute a lot of code or anything anymore, but I used to quite a bit, actually. And once you get past that first commit, usually you feel much more confident that you can do it again, right? And then also, one thing I also mention to people is that, if you do notice something happening, if you notice somebody being bullied or ignored or, something that you're not comfortable with, right? Be a good ally and say something, okay? And it doesn't take much time to say, you know what, let's let this person finish their thought, right? It really, really doesn't. And it sets the tone for the culture, right? That we are making space for each other, we are making space for people to finish what they're saying, that we do value people's opinions, right? Does that help? It sounds like you have more here. What are you talking, give it to me.
I guess after the first commit, how do you stay? After you make the first commit, what makes you want to stay? You personally, I guess.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great question, right? Because, as somebody who reviews a lot of open source projects, right? You see the 500 little commits from the one-time committers, and then you have 5 or 6 active people on a project that are actually the ones that are pushing everything forward, right? And people are wondering, why is this long tail of committers? Why are they not staying, right? Or why are they not getting more involved? Or what happened there, right? And I feel like it has to do with that, feeling welcome, right? Feeling like they, so even having somebody reach out and say, hey, we noticed that you had your first commit here, or something like that. What did you think of it? Get feedback. What was the experience like? Kind of fostering those kinds of things. And then also, I don't want to, I feel like sprints are a really, really great opportunity for people to help each other feel more welcome in open source communities. And I have noticed that a lot of sprinters, after the sprint is over, they're just well, that was fun. I'll see y'all later. Peace, right? And it's just not really, that's really not what we want, right? We want people who are going to be a part of the community, that we have more ideas. But let's also be very real, right? if you don't understand what the roadmap looks like, if you don't understand how the work that you're doing fits into the overall project itself, if you don't really understand, like, if it's just a big pain basically to work with this team, they're very, very unlikely to come back, right? And then not to discount the people who make the one commit because it's just a bug fix. Like, those are probably not the ones you're going to get to stay anyway, right? They're just probably a user, and they're just like, they want to have the bug fix, right? Yeah, it's a hard problem though. I agree. Like, creating welcoming, open communities is very difficult. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So along those lines, you talked about creating space, particularly for women in data science. I've seen a lot of initiatives trying to recruit women into male-dominated industries, less focus on how to retain or maybe create cultures that make them want to stay.
Right.
Do you have, or could you comment a little bit on what you see as maybe some of the main barriers that exist and any sense of best practices?
Sure. This actually gets a little tricky, to tell you the truth, right? Because one of the statistics I actually did not include in the slide, just because I could bombard people with statistics all day long. And I was, this last week I actually went and refreshed my statistics off, like the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and things like that. But generally, like you said, women are not staying in computer science. So it's not even just a matter of people entering the field, they're not staying, right? So people my age in particular generally aren't there anymore. They've moved on to something else. They found a non-technical role, maybe adjacent to a technical role or something like that, and not necessarily in the area, right, that they started in. And some of that is natural career progression, but I also feel like it goes back to the lack of women in leadership, right? If there is no path forward and you don't see other people being promoted, what is the point, right? More likely to try something else, right? And then also, something that I've seen on my own teams is women feel like they have to constantly reapply for their job, okay? When they're constantly having to rattle off their credentials over and over and over and over again every time a new person joins the team, right? And so there's a trust issue there that I can't really put my finger on. And so first off, I think that, building trust in teams it does take time, right? And burning in a team is really, really a painful process. And then once you have a really nice trust organization, people are going to leave. People are only staying in jobs, an average of 2.5 years now. So it's not uncommon to see churn in your teams as well. But trying to maintain that consistency and path forward and make sure that, that they will be just as understood moving forward as well. Because one of the other stories I hear from women anecdotally, and I don't have any data behind this, I am a data person, so a lot of this is anecdotal, but hearing people say that, oh yeah, my manager was fantastic. I joined this organization because this manager just, really lit a fuse, and I felt really, really connected, and I felt like I had a path forward, and that they really, really cared. And then they left. And now I'm under this other person who doesn't give a crap what I have to say about anything, and they feel like they're off on the side. And so, I think that there are organizational issues that need to be worked out. I think there are pay issues that need to be worked out. I think there are leadership issues that need to be worked out. And then amongst ourselves, just taking the opportunity to, remind our coworkers that we do value them, right? And that we want to be a part of them. And it even can be things that are very simple. One thing that I've noticed also on teams is that if there are a lot of guys, like even just planning social events that maybe not the whole team is invited to, right, can also be a problem, right? And I'm not saying don't do that at all, but they do have to create some inclusion, right? Because then the more people feel accepted and listened to and like their ideas matter and pass forward, the more likely they are to stay, right? And so, but yeah, it is it's shocking the number of women in computer science that after all of those different, 30% of women, having a major of computer science, getting their first job after passing the bar of being the 60, the 40% that don't go into technical fields, and then 10 years later dropping out, right? Moving into sometimes completely different fields, right? It's very real, yeah.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned something I thought was really interesting. Whenever companies use open source software, they have to be really cognizant of, yeah, there we go, people injecting proprietary software, like through pull requests, and then your company using it, and then it opens you up to liability issues and stuff. I was curious if you could expand on the process for determining whether or not that's happening, or if there's a risk of it.
I don't have, once again, I have no data behind this, right? But I don't think it happens very often. I really don't. I mean, especially on an active project, right? The whole point is to have governance in place that, if somebody, especially if somebody sees something like copyright IBM or Google or something like that, that someone would not approve that request, right? That pull request, right? And so making sure that you do have the right, governance and leadership in order to be able to review things and have awareness of whether or not that's happening. The reason it comes up is that, I have to do a lot of interfacing with leadership organizations, right? And they're always asking about, like, what is the risk that we're taking on? Why would we trust this? Like, how do we know the governance is working? How do we know that this is not happening? And, what is our exposure here, right? Is it a critical system, or is it something over on the side? Or is it something that's going to be customer facing? Is it something that's going to be internal? All those things like that. So that if it were to happen, that we have a plan in place of what we would do, right? I think that sometimes organizations spend a lot of time, absolutely, let's prevent the problem from happening, right? But we live in a world where we are imperfect, right? And sometimes the mettle of an organization can really be tested by how we respond to problems that come up, right? And so having, things in place to understand what would happen, what would we do if we did find out that this was happening, right? And usually the answer is that, we're going to pull it, right? But the biggest reason that open source projects that I want to use on my team don't get approved is security issues. Not necessarily because of, any kind of governance or, lack of sight for like proprietary software or anything like that. It's usually security and that's across multiple organizations. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have experience with the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
I come from that industry, and as you probably know, that the oil and gas industry is the opposite of this, right? It's very closed.
Yes.
There's very little sharing of tools or data. And now there is this whole revolution that the oil and gas basically is not taking part of because they don't like to share, right? Because everything is proprietary and they want to keep it that way. So what are your thoughts about, I don't have a specific question, but I want to know what is your experience working with the oil and gas industry? How do you think that could change in that area?
Right. I mean, as far as I know, I've never seen an oil gas company open source anything ever, right? So there's that, right? But one of the things that when I have had to talk to organizations like that, I make it really clear that the risk of sharing software and tools is actually very low. Especially in data science, the real value is in the data, right? That's really what's going to be the differentiator on projects and the ability to, take this and make more money on it or something like that. So I have had those conversations, but yeah, I actually could name a couple different industries that I feel that people feel like they're somehow special. But they are using open source, which is great, right? So, I mean, that's something at least, right? But I worked at worked with oil and gas industry a couple of different times in my career, usually more in like a consulting kind of capacity. So I'm able to at least bring these issues up, but nobody I've ever talked to has decided to open source anything. Yeah.
Well, there is an exception, and that's Equinor, formerly Statoil in Norway.
That's awesome. Okay.
They have you have to check that out. They have a lot of open source tools.
Very, very cool. I'm gonna have to check out the Norway oil and gas industry. Guy?
Yeah. So my question is, throughout your career, how have you handled being the naysayer in the room because you're the data person? Like, like what kind of mistakes have you seen, like yourself or other people make? It's like, oh, you're not going to convince anyone talking, to managers or people like that, right? And what kind of advice could you do? And the example that I have in my mind is, at times, someone says like, hey, we're going to do this project and our lead metric is going to be this. And then you're like, wow, there's like very, very few data points to compute that metric. And then they show an error bar, and the error bar is immense. And you're like, well, the effect you want is like much smaller than,
right.
the goal, right? It's much smaller than the error bar. And it's like, can we not do that? Can we do something else? And
right.
like being unable, right? I've been unable to convince people in my career at various times.
Right.
How do you, just reflect on that?
Absolutely. And so communication is such an important part of a successful project, right? I mean, we just can't really get around it. And, and to be, to caveat this, I struggle with this as well, right? I mean, everyone does. And so one of the things that I have noticed, though, I've been very fortunate to be able to work with some executive coaching and like some, leadership training and things like that. And one of the things that they have really, really beat into my head at this point is that sometimes when somebody's feeling very, very resistant to an idea, that they're feeling unheard, right? So once again, let them talk. Let them tell you all the things that are wrong and let them feel like you're really listening and understanding where they're coming from, right? And it's an incredibly effective way to begin conversations, right? So that you're able to diffuse the argument, right? And so that's the first thing. And so let people say their piece, let them talk, just let them go, right? And occasionally actually, somebody has a good point, okay? So, but I'm gonna be clear, that is the exception, not the rule. So, let that happen, right? Then the other thing is, who is your audience, right? Am I talking to C-level executives? Am I talking to an engineering team? Am I talking to another group of data scientists? Am I talking to product managers? Who am I talking to? And I will try to speak their language as much as I possibly can, right? So if I'm talking to a bunch of product managers, maybe I start going in on the A/B testing really hard and really explain, why this is not a good effect or why this is an underpowered test or why we don't want to do this, right? Or if I'm talking to an engineering team, I may talk about architecture or why this is not happening or what the technical problems or issues might be, right? Or if I'm talking to C-level executives, try to build pretty pictures because that seems to be very, very effective, right? And so, but who is the audience? What am I looking at? And sometimes, let's just be real, sometimes it's gonna take a while, right? My favorite thing that seems to happen, I've noticed over time, is sometimes it takes a while to plant a seed with somebody. And when you've really finally gotten them to understand where you're coming from, you just repeat over and over and over and over again, as many different ways as you can express it. And then one day they come back to you and say, you know what, I got this great idea. Or you know what I noticed? I noticed that our error bars are way too big on this. And that's when you finally have inceptioned them into understanding, right? And so people love it when they feel when it's their idea, right? And so that's fine, because One of the things I tell people, especially managers that report to me and things like that, like, do you want to be right or do you want to move the project forward, right? Let's not have that fight whether or not we're right. Let's have the effect that we're trying to make on the project that we're working on, right? It doesn't matter who feels like they came up with the idea. The point is all of us are on the hook for delivering it, right? So, but yeah, repeat again, right? Over and over and over again. And also, sometimes you do have to wait for the strategic failure. I'm just gonna say that. That like, make sure it's well documented, make sure that all of everything, make sure you do your CYA, right? But sometimes you're not gonna be able to help a project not fail, right? And you just have to be able to let it go, right? And ultimately see what happens, right? There are a lot of different ways for us to arrive at a conclusion for a project, and like, let's just see what happens, right? Like, but sometimes you just talked till you're blue in the face, and at some point you just have to say, okay, I've said my piece, I've given you my opinion, I have a lot of experience in this area, this is what I'm telling you, I get it. Like, you're going in a different direction, and you can let it go. Yeah.
This is a bit of a two-part question. So the first part is, when you're on a smaller data science team, a lot of times, like particularly in consulting, you feel like you're wearing a lot of different hats when it comes
Yes.
to like data engineering, cloud deployment, data analysis, that kind of thing. So like, how do you balance where you spend your time learning? And then the second part is, how do you balance the time you spend researching things versus actually like getting down and coding things that actually solve problems?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I am in a leadership position. I have been for a while now, but I am definitely a player coach, if ever there was one, okay? People who have been on my teams before know this for a fact. I roll up my sleeves and I get down and dirty, right? And so I think it's a very interesting question, because I realized pretty early on that if my team is blocked by the issue that I said I was going to put the fix in for, then I'm actually not helping my team, right? So sometimes I jump around a lot, right? With like, am I working on getting more resources? Am I working on building a better relationship with our data engineering team? Am I working on, making sure that the C-level is giving us coverage that we need? All of those things like that, I can jump around quite a bit, right? And the only way that I can describe it, and I don't know if this is helpful, and I have no guidance really whether or not this is working, but at the same time, it's like, what is the most important thing I need to be doing today, right? And focus on that, right? And sometimes it really has to be on a daily basis that I have to rejuggle, right? So like, does my team need more help? Do we need to, do research something, right? Or do I need to be focusing, like, sometimes I can be way more effective with a PowerPoint than I can be with a piece of code, right? So just being flexible, I think, is really, really important. But I do also believe very strongly in the player coach mentality, because I hope that my teams know that I have their back and that I can jump in and help out and code all night with them just alongside them, and that we get there together as a team, right? So, and I feel like it works, and it creates a lot of camaraderie on the teams. Yeah. I hope. I don't know, you guys actually can answer that better than I can.
It does. So, follow-up question to my previous question. So, the more specific one. Suppose higher ups tell you, like, here's our lead metric. Here's the effect we're looking for. Like, success is moving this by X%.
Yep.
And it's like, this could go anyway because it's super noisy, and you guys picked a terrible lead metric. Now it's your responsibility to motivate the whole team to work towards that somehow. What do you do?
Well, the way I describe this, because I get this question from other managers as well, right, is that there are company goals, there are division goals, there are team goals, and then there are Katrina's goals, okay? And so sometimes when something is going on that maybe it's really great when all of those things are in complete alignment, right? But they rarely are, right? And so when that happens, you know, sometimes you just level with people and let them know, hey, we just have to do this because it's table stakes and we're being asked to do it, right? We got to take one for the team and we're going to have to do this. Other times, if you do have a better solution, push for that in tandem, right? Say, okay, here's what you guys have asked for, but maybe take a look at the work that we're doing right here and how it might be a better direction for us to go in, right? And it does create a lot of work, but at the same time, as part of that communication and being very transparent about, you know, what's going on. Because the thing I know for sure doesn't work is saying, we shouldn't do that. Like that's a terrible idea. That will never fly. Absolutely not. So, but yeah, it's hard, and hopefully organizations, you know, I'm very rarely in the position, or at least I've been fortunate to very rarely be in the position where I'm responsible for something that I cannot at all buy into, right? That would, I'm not sure how I would feel about that, right? It has to be it has to be a conversation, right? And I want to be in an organization that values experience and maybe other ways of doing things, right? But we all have to keep in mind that there's a possibility that we're wrong, okay? And that is exactly the way to go, right? So always keep that in mind, that, like, you know, can I look at this a different way, or can I relate to this in a different way in order to get us closer to where we want to be, right?
There are lots of projects in open source environment. Like for any task, there are usually 2-3 projects, and we can use some of them, we can try another one. I'd like you to share your experience as a manager. So how you find balance between, like, when half of your team want to try like every project to applying to your like every open source project applying to your work, and other half of the team wants to stay with old Fortran library. So is there a balance? Did you find that? So what's your experience with that?
In my, if we have time, I love to let teams bake it off. Like, just let them both try it and see what happens, right? And generally let the team duke it out, right? It's actually one of my favorite things to do, believe it or not. But rarely do we have that time, by the way. But when we do have the time, yeah, absolutely. You feel strongly about this solution, you feel strongly about this solution, go for it. Let's see what happens, right? We don't always have that luxury, right? And so a lot of times, especially when we're under tight deadlines, we have to make a call, right? And so being willing to make that hard call is part of what we have to do, right? That being able to lead a team and make the call that, like, we're going to go in this direction, and, you know, keep an open mind about it, right? So that people stay engaged in the project, right? Because especially having been a developer in the past, I didn't agree with every technical decision, right? But we could agree upon the fact that we did get to some happy place in the end. You know, like I said before, that there are a lot of different paths to how to get to the end of a project, right? Or get to the end of a deliverable. And so let's make room for the fact that, like, maybe this time we go this direction, maybe the next time we go this direction, or something like that, right? Without creating a lot of chaos, right? And that's the big thing, is that, you know, diffusing that sort of like, I don't like this decision, so I'm going to take all my toys and go home, you know, kind of mentality is the thing that I really try hard to diffuse as much as possible, right? But yeah, sometimes you got to make a hard call, and you do the best you can, and hopefully, you know, I tell my teams this all the time, that if I'm batting about 75, 80%, I'm feeling pretty good about myself, right? And leave open the fact that, you know, I'm a human and I make mistakes too. And, you know, but that we're going to be in it together, right? Yeah.
You mentioned in your presentation that you're not, you know, scared of like AI. Like you get that question a lot.
I do. It's a lot.
And I think that seems pretty like a pretty good stance. But I also think, you know, small things slipping in to a model or something can have a big effect.
Agreed.
And I'm wondering, out of the things that you listed there, like which of those do you find yourself most often like concerned about, of like slipping in and creating sort of like a accidental malevolence, you know, effect, and what you're
Okay, so if the question is like, what is the technology that's going to enslave humanity? I don't know. Okay, I'm not going to take a stance on that one. But the thing that keeps me up the most at night is actually the introduction of bias into machine learning. That is the one that absolutely makes me crazy, and it's why I mentioned it first, actually, because you know, there's something to be said for optimizing and creating models in order to like make a quick buck or a short-term, you know, effect. But sometimes we forget about the long-term effects of what we are finding, right? And so, and what effect that is having on the society or the culture that we choose to live in, right? So, yes, some things may be profitable in the short term, but is it creating the sustainable long-term growth and marketplace that we want it to be in, right? Or is it creating the thing that we want to see in the world? And then also, where does novelty play into this whole thing, right? I would hate a world where I never saw anything novel, and that all of my most base you know, impulses were catered to by every machine learning model around me to make me like a better consumer, but not necessarily a better person, right? And how do I break out of those bubbles, break out of those patterns, right? And it feels like already we're in a situation where people have to seek out new information or seek out novel experiences or seek out novel recommendations, right? As opposed to just constantly being, you know, in this, you know, self-reinforcing bubble. And so that's the one that really, really keeps me up at night. The other one that I actually, I think about quite a bit when I'm working on like more, how should I put, like more nefarious or security oriented type things, is that when you're dealing with these adversarial systems, right? And this is actually something I'm stealing directly from Greg here in the first row, but that they become so good that the signal disappears, right? And we can no longer tell the difference, right? That as things are adversarially getting better and better and better and better and better, that we can no longer actually see that signal anymore, that we've actually learned, you know, the adversaries have learned how to beat the machines, right? And that, because we have to be able to show a statistically significant amount of signal in order for the model to work, right? That's something that also really, really bothers me, because I see it quite often, especially on the security side, more so than anywhere else, that, you know, you're looking at somebody who's breaking into a system or something like that, and you can almost see them adapt almost immediately, right? Or they're creating that novel input that we can't account for just yet, right? So, yeah.
So to set the stage a little bit, I'm still at the beginning of my career. So on one hand, I'm trying to keep an open mind towards different ways that my career could go, but at the same time, I want to have a solid answer for what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? And I've also noticed that there's a lot of granularity when it comes to the different sections of data science. Like you can kind of fragment it into analysts, data engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And even within those sections, there's still fragmentation. I was wondering, do you notice any, towards the goal of maybe like finding your niche, do you notice any trends as far as when people are exploring what personality types maybe tend to correlate with what kind of positions, or what do certain people tend to find, you know what I mean? Or maybe advice in that direction?
I was going to say, I don't really know if every time I try to guess what I think somebody on my team wants, I'm always wrong, so I just ask, right? Like, where do you want to go, right? And what do you want to do with your career? I believe that if you don't create some sort of path to self-actualization, you lose your employees pretty fast, right? And so it's very, very important to pay attention to what people want, first off, right? And then on the other side of it, as you probably have noticed, I've actually been all over the place, right? I've worked on platforms, I've worked on data science stuff, I've worked on business stuff, I've worked on low-level stuff, I've worked on government stuff, I've worked on all of these different things. And I wouldn't have it any other way, to tell you the truth, because it's been fun as hell. Okay, so like for somebody like me, and I can really only speak to my experiences, is that, I love learning new things. I love being able to move into these other areas. I love being able to take techniques and applying them to something new and to try something new. And that's just something that works for me, and it may not work for other people, right? But that's my thing. So I don't know. I feel like careers are just so incredibly personal, that you gotta be careful on that one. But I do recommend that you, at least try a couple different things before you decide on a path. And also be flexible, knowing that where you think you might be going might not be where you actually end up. Okay. Yeah. Sound good? All right. Well, thank you so much for attending.